We are on air.
Okay, great.
Hello everyone. Now we're having a great day today. It's a mega month of curating together with Untitled Architecture, the month of Italian architecture in Yerevan, and I'm giving floor to Bogdan, our partner, to introduce our guest who will be lecturing today. Bogdan, please.
Okay, yes. Thank you so much, Alexei and Yuri. So, first of all, I would like to thank Simone from Formafantasma for being with us today. So, few words about Formafantasma. It's a research-based design studio investigating ecological, historical, political, and social forces shaping the discipline on design. Today, we invited Formafantasma to be with us to discuss a topic which is very much interesting for us and the Armenian, reality, which is the topic of ordinary architecture. So ordinary architecture is the concept that explores the idea of the daily quality of architecture and focusing on the beauty of the space, but also the objects within that space. So being a part of this curated event, we wanted to establish the cross-disciplinary research initiative, viewing the architecture and the interiors as the fundamental element of design, but also transcending the generational boundaries through the perspective of Italian experience. So saying that, I would like to give the floor to Simone to give the lecture on their vision of the politics of product design and introduce Formafantasma with their experience and give us, and share with us their understanding of the product design in today's reality. And so thank you, Simone, very much. And I give the floor to you.
Well,
I think we lost the connection with Simone. So let's just wait a few moments for him to come back.
hello, can
Okay.
you hear me?
Yes, you're back. Great.
I don't know what happened. Sorry. I was just about to say, so me and Andrea, we established our office in the Netherlands because we studied first in Italy, industrial design, and then in Holland. And now, in this moment, we are based in Milan. But what we always thought was interesting about the discipline of design is that it is a very ambiguous discipline because it sits in a crucial point that intersect, of course, questions related to aesthetics, questions related to social innovation, questions related to economy, and of course, questions also related to ecology. And of course, it is a very complex intersection of different elements. If you think about how the discipline of design developed, it developed in conjunction with industrial revolution. But especially in Europe, design played an extremely important role together with architecture, for instance, in reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War. In the passing of time, this sort of commitment of using design and architecture as a social force for development, of course, became a very different tool, also in the hands of economic interests. So we are describing this because our discipline or the way we approach our office, it is inevitably thinking about these dichotomies, these different energies that shapes the discipline of design. On one side, it is really about using design as a positive force for change and for positive change. And on the other side, we should also recognize that design is a tool for economic expansion and to create a desirability in product, desirability in architecture, and so on. So the presentation that I'm going to do today is focusing on essentially two body of works that we developed independently, and they were commissioned from museums. So they are not really, they are research projects that they did have and they do have an impact in our practice, but they have been developing completely out of our own personal interest without necessarily a commission from a client. And we conduct this kind of project sort of regularly, once every, let's say, 3 years or more or less, because we have this necessity to be free to think about the implications of what we do as designers, specifically also in relation to ecology, so that when we have the chance, we manage to reapply the kind of knowledge that we acquire during these processes back into the more commercial works that we do. So I would like to start now with a presentation of a work that we presented for the first time during the beginning, sadly, of the pandemic in 2020, the COVID pandemic. But it was the fruit of 2 years, more or less 2 years, 1 year and a half, of research on a subject that was really relevant to us, which is the how we as architects, designers, producers, generally I would say also humans, we extract values from forests. But I think it is important to understand the kind of body of work to contextualize on the commission that we received from the museum where we exhibited the work. Let me first share the presentation. Let me know if you see the screen. I hope you do.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
So the work is called Cambio. And as I said, it was presented in 2020, but then it had a different iteration. But in this presentation, I will not go through in detail all the sort of the elements of the exhibition, but I will try to highlight the kind of thinking that lays behind it. So the commission we received was from Andrea Cobris, the curator of Serpentine Galleries in London, who is a location where generally art is presented. But once every few years, Andrea asks also designers to do a show in their spaces. But what was interesting about the commission is that Andrea pointed out how he's not interested in doing product-based design exhibition, but he's interested in allowing designers to explore their thinking, but through a curated show where the focus is not a display of products, which is an attitude that we completely agree with, because of course, the moment you enter in the space of the museum, it is interesting to use it as a way of reflecting on the implications of the discipline of design or architecture, rather than displaying architectural models or products in an exhibition setting. For us, this was a great opportunity because of many reasons. But one of the things that we thought was interesting of the location is that the Serpentine Gallery is situated in a park in central London, where in 1851 happened the first international exposition, and where Joseph Paxton built the Crystal Palace. I'm trained as a designer. You are all trained as architects, so you know what I'm talking about better than I do, probably. But we thought that what was really extremely interesting about this connotation that for us the location has, so the proximity to where the exposition of the 51 happened, it's because I think the way we interpret the contemporary design, or at least how the discipline of design was formalized over time, is extremely affected by this presentation and the other presentations of products and industrial machinery they have been presented after this. And I'm saying this because as you probably know, in the International Exhibition of the 51, it was really a way of celebrating the achievement of industrial production. So in the exposition, there wasn't only products, but actually also a lot of machinery. And together with these machineries, also many raw materials, mostly coming from colonized territories. So it was really, for us, an interesting exhibition that is, for the first time, really clarifying extremely important relationships between material exploitations, also in colonized territories, development in industrial production, and the collaboration with the arts to create applied art. It is not the case that with the selling of the tickets of the exposition of the 51, the Victoria and Albert Museum was founded. It was really a pragmatic decision to use the economic, gaining from the exposition and the success of the exposition to create a museum that is working really, or it was working as a study collection. It was a way to say to the participants, to the people visiting the Crystal Palace, and also to designers, that they were not yet existing in a way as a profession, but it was more like artists, to provide a study collection to take inspiration to achieve the highest quality in industrial production. But it is here that for us the connection between the exploitation of resources, industrial evolution, and design is somehow, these relationships somehow clarified or exemplified by the exposition of the 51. There is another very interesting aspect of this exposition. We all know that the importance of the Crystal Palace, is quite important for architecture, because it was the first architecture of that scale that was using steel and glass to construct not anymore a greenhouse, because that, the author of the Crystal Palace was trained as an horticulturist, but he was here somehow becoming an architect, proposing a greenhouse not anymore for the well-being and the survival of plants, but rather for the exposition, the glorification of industrial achievements. We think it is interesting that in the architecture, plants were marginalized as a form of decor. In a way, during the show at Serpentine, for us it was the opportunity to focus again on those trees symbolically, and to give them center stage, to somehow looking at that implicit relationship between industrial development, production of objects, and exploitation of resources. It was symbolized by the reappropriation of this typology of the greenhouse and the marginalization of tree within the Crystal Palace. To start from that and to give center stage in the exhibition that is focusing fully on the analysis, critique, and unpacking of how the timber industry actually works, which is an industry that we as designers, specifically also work with industrial design, we inevitably intersect whenever we do something. And of course, timber is an extremely relevant material for architecture too in this moment. But it is also a material that it doesn't not only intersect furniture design, but even just like any kind of product that, for instance, we need to produce and to ship around the world, that of course is created in boxes and delivered all over the world. So of course the significance of the timber industry is not only related to the interiors or to furniture, but it is way beyond that. Also keep in mind that the exhibition was also in a park. So for us it was the perfect occasion to address this subject that is extremely important to us, and to for once not focusing on a material from the perspective they usually design. So for the technical possibilities of a material in terms of its application, but rather to understand how it is extracted and what are the forces, the politics that generate that kind of industry. The exhibition is called Cambio, because of several reasons, and I refer to it as an exhibition. But in first place, this is a research project that we are still also, it is still part of our practice, but it was presented and formalized in an exhibition and then toured in several other locations. But to go back to the name cambio, you have to know cambio in Italian means change, but the cambia layer is also a layer that exists in trees that is a few cells thick, and it's situated between the bark of the tree and an internal flesh of the tree. And the cambia layer is an extremely important layer because these few cells, what they are doing is collecting information. I'm simplifying, of course, because I'm not a scientist, but they're more or less understanding what is happening outside of or all around the tree. They collect information, they somehow translate this information to be understood by the internal side of the plant, so that the plant can adapt to changes. So it is somehow an extremely important layer that has an importance also in terms of the adaptations of trees during climate change. But in this case, there is another aspect that is interesting about this layer, and that is that whenever, as you can see in the picture here, that a tree is cut and it's sort of ready to become a product, not anymore a living creature, what is happening is that the bark of the tree is removed. And of course, with this removal of the bark, of course, the cambia layer is removed too. And we're very much interested in this sort of moment of transition between, the tree being a living creature and when it starts to become a product. Of course, when we, as I said, I will not explain everything, but a lot of the sort of the research we have been doing was also somehow understanding the kind of relationship that we as humans have been building with trees and plants all over the years, and also the sort of the realization, for instance, of how much anthropic intervention and extraction is impacting also the existence of certain trees. These images, for instance, are incredible, and they have been shot in the United States when major secular trees have been cut for, of course, the development of the country. And they look like surreal. They seem like reconstructions of Hollywood, but in fact, this is a total reality. And it's, somehow it is still surprising to me when I look at these pictures to even conceive that species of trees like this existed, because despite there are still sort of major species in the United States, these dimensions of trees are in the verge of disappearance. Of course, the whole exhibition had an ecological concern, and the exhibition was starting with a film where we addressed a major ecological disaster that happened in northern Italy, where millions of trees have been sort of blew away by a storm in a few hours. And for us, it was important to start with a film depicting this area, because in the course of the exhibition, we are trying to unpack the several knowledge that we can somehow gain actually by the studying of trees. And the movie it was a short movie depicting this area, was paired together with another film, the one that you see with a big green background, where we made a coring. We extracted the internal flesh of a tree with a coring, and analyze it with local scientists, because there is a science that is called dendrochronology, that is a science that is understanding climate change by the study of tree rings on wood. And we thought it was interesting to start the opening of the exhibition with these images, because we find somehow interesting that trees are providing oxygen and intake of CO2 from the atmosphere. So they are providing solutions for climate change, but they're also providing tools to understand how the climate is changing. And we use this coring from the specific tree that was destroyed by the storm as a way of proving how even the lifetime of the tree, through the studies that are possible to reconstruct through dendrochronology, you can see how much in the Alps the temperature has shifted, causing the same kind of disastrous climate events that are that are impacting the area. So it was a way to show how somehow trees are helping not only in providing solutions but also understanding what is actually happening in the climate. And so this was the opening of the show, which was a constant to understand how the show was constructed, was a constant collaboration or conversation with a variety of different disciplines. This was another brief that Andrea gave to us. He said, like, you can do whatever you want, but I don't want a product exhibition. And I wanted a collective show that you curated so that you can also take the works of others. But instead of taking the works of other designers or architects, we also included that. But the majority of people we invited to collaborate with us or to display their work, they are actually coming from other disciplines, mostly from the discipline of science, anthropology, lawmaking, activism, policymaking, and I don't know if I mentioned that already, and philosophy. For us, this was also another way also of declaring, specifically also in the discipline of design, that I have to say it's a little bit less inclusive than the one of architecture, at least from our experience. It is very insular, and it is a lot about just about the form or the quality of the aesthetic quality of things. But we have the feeling that the responsibility we have as designers, because we shape the world, is also to have a better understanding of what we do and the complexity of the world. And the best way of doing that is, of course, establishing conversations with other disciplines. So the opening of the exhibition was with this tree trunk that, as I said before, it is somehow exemplifying the moment in which a tree is transforming into an actual product, and these films that I mentioned before. The exhibition continued with other forms of reflections on data and information that are obtainable from trees, mostly with these installations here, where we did a reproduction of a classic, I mean, what it was a classic, now it is not anymore in production, from IKEA. That is called Backbone or something like that, which was a stool that we took it and we copied it and produced it with different kind of essence of wood, with oak at the top and I think pine at the bottom, something like that. Don't remember anymore the exact succession of the stacking of the different essence of wood we use for the stools. But the main concept here was rather simple. With another group of scientists, we reconstructed a way of calculating the amount of CO2 that is stored within wood. I guess you all know, trees absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. The 45% of the mass of wood is actually CO2, and it's stored within wood. So of course, it is important that CO2 is maintained within that the wood as long as possible. At least it should stay there as long as another tree grows. So to intake that CO2 that is emitted in the case you throw away that object. The life cycle of a product, ideally in wood, to not emit further CO2 in the atmosphere, should be that a product should live as long as it takes for a tree to grow back, to compensate the CO2 emissions. But of course, this is the reason why we chose a product of IKEA. The business model there is about constant substitution. Very often the prices of the object, especially if you move, for instance, your apartment, it is cheaper to really buy another product than the cost of moving those products. So the idea of reproducing these tools with different essences of wood, these typologies of wood, it's because depending on the density of the flesh of the tree, and of course the object has more or less CO2. Hence, for instance, the stool at the top, which was oak, it's supposed to exist and to last at least 80 years to guarantee that there is a compensation between the CO2 emissions that inevitably are again in the atmosphere if you throw away the stool and the time that it takes the tree to grow. In the object instead against the wall, it was a collaboration with an institute in Germany, which is called Thunen Institute. And the Thunen Institute is an institution that is actually providing information. Well, it's a scientific institution that studies the morphology of wood on different levels. But this institution is also collaborating with European Union to do tests on objects that enter European Union that are imported. The idea here is this: to control, to make tests, and of course in all the objects, to guarantee, to see if the declarations, the typology of wood by the importer is the same as the actual wood. This to counteract illegal logging and illegal importations of species that are actually protected. So in the course of the preparation of the exhibition, we collected random objects of all kinds within European Union, between the Netherlands and Belgium. We were still living in the Netherlands back then, and Italy, and we provide them to the Tunen Institute in Germany, who started to check, and the folders on the shelves are sort of a report on this test to see if everything corresponds to declarations. And it was somehow, well, not really surprising, because the knowledge is there that there's a large percentage of objects and materials that enter the European Union that are actually coming from illegal species. For instance, to make you a few examples, charcoal for barbecue was the material that had the most tropical species, protected species. And why is that? Because of course it is easier when you incinerate material to do not notice in case you have been using this kind of protected species. The same goes for musical instruments, where very often rare species of wood are used because it is thought, many people think they have a better performance for sound. But there was also very stupid objects, such as like brushes for makeup and so on, that was using illegal species. This was, of course, an exercise in providing sort of an understanding also for larger public of the kind of situation that we are facing when we're talking about wood and the use of wood. And of course, well, these are just images of the kind of institutions we have been working with. I will not explain all the installations, otherwise it will take too long, but we'll just mention a similar exercise we've been doing with this installation, which is called we named it on the origin of the species as the Darwin publication, the famous Darwin publication, where we look at the origin of the species, but not really of the content of Darwin, but rather of the paper that was used for the reproduction of the books of Darwin, to see if there is still a correspondence between the location where the book is printed and distributed, and the wood that is endemic in that area, and the fibers within the books. Here, for instance, the findings were sort of somehow obvious, but it was interesting to see, for instance, publications, Brazilian publications of the book, that they were produced with eucalyptus. And eucalyptus is a tree which is original of Australia and New Zealand, but it is a fast-growing species, which is extensively used for paper production. And it was clear that, for instance, that is there in Brazil because the paper pulp production is becoming a huge business, specifically also for many Finnish companies that own companies in Brazil, because they don't want anymore to cut trees in Finland. They are still doing that extensively, but it is cheaper to produce in Brazil. Also, there's more hours of sun, so the trees grows quickly. Of course, it is inevitable these species are substituting the endemic, the local flora, the local, inevitably also the local fauna. Last but not least, I would just like also to mention a few other interventions in the show, such as, for instance, this, where it was at the center of the show somehow, and it's connecting back to the origin of the starting point of the show, which is the exhibition of the 51. Because we took there in the show specimen of timbers that was presented in London in the 1851, that were all collected by, of course, the British Empire in colonized territories, and they were provided in the exhibition, the Crystal Palace, and described as the Economic Botany Collection, which is still part of the Kew Gardens in London. And it was described, as the title says it completely, as a collection, a botanical collection for economic purpose. So it was interesting somehow. If you think about this exhibition, you had furniture pieces present, you had machinery, and you had these specimens of timber, where people were invited to use them for furniture making and other applications. Interestingly enough, when these specimens of timbers were also collected, if you visit the collection in Kew Gardens, they come together with also indigenous product to display how this wood could be appropriated. I mean, of course, this is really a colonial nightmare. But the reason why we also exhibited in this moment of the exhibition, in this section of the exhibition, it's because to do a step back, we talked about how we work with the Tuning Institute in Germany to analyze and to understand how to counteract illegal logging. But that can happen only, of course, if you have a library to compare the specimens of timbers, right? So you take a sample from an object, you need to compare it to an existing library of wood specimen to understand what kind of specimen of timber it is. And of course, the countries that own those extensive libraries are all European countries that have a colonial heritage, of course, because they own all the specimens of timber. So it is somehow a way of connecting sort of the contemporary roots or the contemporary reality of the timber industry with the colonial past, and to see how they are still very much related. We also had the film coming together with it, where we were showing the archives of the Victoria and Albert Museum, and which is, as I described it before, it was a study collection, right? It was on purpose for designers to take inspiration to design furniture. And the film was concluding with, we were overlapping somehow in the film, these collections of materials and objects with a film displaying a very famous rendering program called Keyshot, which have different plugins. You know how rendering programs works. You can download plugins with different materials, surfaces, and so on. You can render products. What is interesting is you can download plenty of plugins that use illegal timber species. So again, this was a critique how the tools itself, in the past it was the study collection, the contemporary tools are still perpetuating an irresponsible way of talking about resources and materials only as rendering of surfaces. It's somehow also the idea of rendering a surface. It's extremely a shallow way of approaching industrial production. The last part of the show instead was focusing much more on legislation and looking at an ecosystem that was inevitable to address in a project like this, which is the Amazon. And we addressed it with various different ways. But one thing that for us was important, it was also to address indigenous knowledge. Because, of course, how can we talk about forests without acknowledging people that actually lives within it and depends on this ecosystem? Not only depends from it, but actually also are extremely important to protect this ecosystem. And we work with this NGO called Gaia Amazonas that is based in Colombia and helps indigenous communities to map their territories, to have tools that can be politically used for the protection of their territories. What is interesting of the conversation that we have been having with representatives of the community, but also with the NGO, is that it is super fascinating to see how these communities have a completely different understanding of the forest. Of course, the forest is understood as a large, complex ecosystem, as a biome. And so when it is fascinating because you could see that, for instance, when communities of Colombia, they have been asked to draw maps of their territories. First of all, they despise Western ways of representing their territory because they find it extremely limiting. But also it was beautiful to see how when they had to describe their territory, they understand it as a biome. So from Colombia, they were extending their territories to Brazil because, of course, they were following the route of rivers. They were following the route of trees expansion. And we thought this was extremely interesting because we overlap these drawings and these mappings with also sort of papers and documents that we've been developing with Philip Patberg, which is the guy you see on the right in the screen. That is an expert in developing legislation, or he studied beyond many other things in the Anthropocene. And so we were discussing with him sort of the existing legislation regarding forest protection. And there is not an international agreement on forest protection. The reason why there's not an international agreement is, of course, because of political and geopolitical tensions. And it was somehow interesting because with discussion with him, he was describing how one of the major problems creating regulation of this kind is that natural ecosystems, of course, they do not work within national borders. So again, there is this sort of complexity in agreeing on a common ground when we talk about complex ecosystems such as forests, because of course they are transnational. And it is interesting to see how, sort of the community who we've been working with, they were equally understanding the necessity of understanding things as a biome. But also if we look at it politically, we need to do that on that level if we want to do so. And with Philip Atberg, we have been doing something which was a speculative exercise, where we asked him to draft an hypothetical paper for the rights of trees. This is not anything new. It is since the 70s that politically, sort of the rights of non-humans have been advocated through legislation, political legislation. But what was interesting is that we asked him to draft this document, but it was really a provocation because in itself, it is something that it's, of course, impossible to do simply because of this political disagreement. But we thought it was an argument that was interesting to put forward in the show. I would like to conclude regarding the description of this exhibition with a film that was concluded in the show. There was a conversation and a collaboration we did with Emanuele Coccia, who is a philosopher, who wrote a wonderful book, between many others, that is called The Life of Trees. And we use a technology which is called LiDAR, that is used also, in architecture. You're probably familiar with it. It's a laser technology that you can sort of scan. How you can find it even on your iPad or on your iPhone. You can easily scan objects using laser, but it was a technology was very early used to scan forests, to understand what trees to cut. It's used in various ways, but it's often used by corporations to understand trees that are ready to be cut, to understand the livelihood of a forest and so on. And we thought it was interesting to use this tool, which is very, it's very technocratic. It's a completely technocratic way of understanding a forest, because again, the kind of image that it gives you back is the shell. It's sort of this ghostly surface of a tree. It's not giving you any other information but the surface. Again, as with renderings. But we like this sort of the ghostly also aesthetics that it gives back. And we basically what we're doing, we are sort of moving the camera within the forest of oaks. And we asked Emanuele, in conversation with us, to write a voiceover where sort of a tree is somehow speaking, or an entity, or the forest is speaking back to humans, reversing a bit sort of the idea that the humans are the dominant species on planet Earth, and trying to develop a sort of a less anthropocentric perspective. Of course, this is sort of almost it's almost like our own interpretation of Disney movie, right? Where we give life to trees, but we use it as a tool to really question the relationship that we have as humans on planet Earth. And we thought this was a very good way of concluding the show, because we started sort of very data-based, and we wanted to conclude on a more metaphysical level the exhibition. So, well, the show also had plenty of films that are actually partially available on our website. I will not describe, but many of these films are trying to reconstruct sort of the major certification schemes that are existing regarding timber, and another film instead of being a bit more historical and describing the evolution of the relationship that humans established with trees, starting from the primordial water, when plants emerge and create the atmosphere, in the contemporary sort of ecological movement. So it was somehow a power of 10, but not based on scale, but based on time, to give you an indications of the kind of ambition that we had in the film. And we also constructed a database where we share the research, and all the interviews we'll be conducting, because a lot of our work is based on reading existing things and also establishing conversations with various different practitioners and to have also really personal relationship that we establish. Also because when you work with scientists, it is the best way to actually develop a real an in-depth conversation. Scientists very often, when they are within the academic sphere, of course, they need to respect, rightly so, academic reality. But that means that very often they cannot really. When you speak with a scientist, they are generally much more free to make associations and discuss the implications of what they do in a way that is much more, we believe, interesting. I don't know how much time we still have, because I could also introduce another project.
If you can, it would be great.
Yes.
The second project.
How much time do I have still? Sorry, I got lost with time.
25 minutes.
Great. So in the course of the presentation, I would like to show two works and also to show you how we also try to reapply this kind of thinking with our clients. So to start from theory and also move to application. But I would like to show another research work that we presented in a space of a museum. Also, these projects we also published books related to this research work. And the second work that I would like to present is called Oltreterra, and it was presented at the National Museum of Norway. And it is, in this case, while with the previous work, we chose the subject. In this case, the subject was given by the museum, but it allowed us to explore things that we were interested in any case to explore. So the curator of the museum saw the previous research body of work, and she gave us the commission to develop something similar related to wool. And we were really surprised because we were working on wood before, and then we thought, okay, this is somehow bizarre. And also we were never really, this is not a material that we were really engaging with previously. But what we thought was interesting of the commission is that when she said wool, we said, okay, we are going to address this, but we are much more interested in looking at the relationship we have with animals. We were concluding Cambio, as I said before, with that film. And sort of, for us, the interesting question that we're raising also with the film is also ethical questions of how do we work as designers when we intersect living beings? In that case, it was trees. But of course, when you talk about wool, you really talk about, mostly sheep. There's many other animals you can extract wool from. But for us, what is interesting of these research works is that we can really analyze and discuss and unpack how we worked with the extraction of values from existing ecosystem, but also from living creatures. This is an interesting question for us. And in the case of, because we don't have a lot of time, I will not talk a lot about the, as I did with Cambio before, all the different interventions, but I would like to tell you more broadly about the approach that we had for the show. And we start with these images of dioramas because they are in a way the starting point of the show. We find it fascinating that when you talk about sort of nature or animals, you need to to explore this realm. You need to go to a natural history museum, right? And this is the realm where sort of the relationship we have with animals is discussed. Actually, it's not even the relationship we have with the animals, but the natural world is discussed within this realm in exhibition making. And diorama is a tool which is now used less and less, but it's somehow iconic of this way of addressing the natural world, the natural landscape. And we find it completely fascinating. As always, when you're fascinated by something, it's often because you hate it. In a way, we hate dioramas, but they are also extremely beautiful. Let's be honest about it, in terms of executions and techniques and so on. But the reason why we hate them is because everything is wrong about it. Because it gives you the illusion, first of all, the human is sitting in a space of safety, and superiority on this side of the glass. And on the other side of the glass, there is wilderness, which is represented as something that is still. It's still, it's graspable, it's finite, it's never changing, which is the opposite of what is happening nowadays, especially in a climate crisis. We know then that the natural world is not like that. It's not static. It's absolutely not like that. And also, when we talk about ecology, it's also about understanding that we as humans, we are not apart from it. We are within it. We are nature. We are within it, with all our complexity, with all our cyborg body, with all our extensions. But we are within it. What is interesting is that it will never happen to see a sheep within a diorama. You will always see a wild mouflon. You will always see a wolf. You will always see deafness. And we wondered why that happens, right? Why is it the wolf is there but not the sheep? We have the wild mouflon, but we don't have the sheep. Well, we think that is because we as humans think, we believe, I mean, it's our own theory, that the domesticated animals sit with us on this side of the glass because they are conceived as product of human intelligence. The wilderness is considered somehow superior. Of course, it was also, for instance, for somebody such as Darwin, it was interesting to look at wilderness to reconstruct how evolution works. So it is not only for the reasoning we are giving, but there is also this dimension. Well, wilderness is out there and the domesticated is close to us. We know the domesticated because we created it. But we are challenging a bit this reality. And the reason why we are challenging it is because by looking into wool, many questions arise. For instance, one thing that we always knew since the beginning, we wanted to talk with evolutionists that they could explain us how it came that the sheep evolved in the way they are. And one fascinating aspect about sheep that probably many of you already know is that sheep do not anymore naturally shed. So wild mouflons, they are naturally shedding, so they lose their hair naturally. Sheep don't do that anymore. These are, for instance, drawings of species that are still natural shedding, but it's basically the majority of sheep don't do that anymore. This is a picture of a sheep that was called Shrek because it was found after the sheep was lost in a forest in New Zealand, and when it was found again, the sheep was almost not breathing anymore under the collapsing weight and warmth of her own fleece. Sheep need the human hand to take care of their fleece. And we thought this was completely fascinating. But when you talk with evolutionists, for many years, the common description not in scientific papers, but in common literature, is that the human domesticated the animal, the intelligent being, the man, domesticated the animal, and somehow with crossbreeding, dictated the evolution of the animal. But if you look at in evolutionary terms, this evolution of the sheep started so early that, simply humans were not technicians yet, and they didn't have yet this knowledge about crossbreeding. So when you talk with evolutionists, at least the one we talked about, they say, well, we can only guess that this happened because of proximity between the human and the animal. Maybe humans invented the scissors. Maybe we don't know what happened. But essentially, we know that this proximity, it was beneficial for both, for humans and for the sheep. Why do we think this is interesting? Because in literature, it is often described this very hierarchical relationship. But if the human domesticated the sheep, we believe the sheep domesticated equally the human. We could never be, for instance, living in certain areas of the planet without the warmth of wool. We could not have traveled the world without the constructions of textile with wool. And so this process of domestication, we view it as a process of co-domestication, where the human is equally domesticated by the animal. So we're trying to decentralize a bit the perspective here of the centrality of the human. And there are these wonderful pictures that you see here where the human is somehow blending within the landscape together with the use of the fleece of the animal. And if you think about the process of transhumance, I hope you are familiar with the idea of transhumance, this idea that you travel the world together with your flock to take the flock where it needs to go because of, you take it to, you take the sheep to higher mountains and you take it to the valleys. At least this is what is happening in Europe in many countries when the temperature is too cold in the mountains. But here the question is, in transhumance, is it the human that is leading the flock, or is it the flock that needs to go to the mountains and the humans follows them? So it's these questions of this beautiful relationship where the landscape is in the making together with sheep, because then seeds are stuck in the fleece of the sheep, and then seeds are transported in the landscape, and the landscape is shifting, and the humans follows them, and or the sheep follows the human. But what I mean to say here is the relationship is complex. It's not about one intelligent creature. And in this ecology, there is also the domesticated wolf that becomes a dog that helps to communicate between all these different species. So it was such a fascinating relationship to look at. But of course, the scope of the exhibition was really also to look at, the productions of wool. We look a lot about also questions related to wool waste in Europe, the relationship with colonialism in Australia, and again here establishing conversations with shepherds, with scientists, with practitioners of all kinds to construct the show. But I would like to jump to images of the show, because I would like to talk about how we formalize the exhibition, and knowing that the World Show was really trying to understand sort of the complexity of also wool making and the status quo of the industry, which is basically a disaster because everything is centralized in Australia, where animals are intensively farmed, and local farmers in Europe and in many other countries, not only in Europe but in the US. I don't know how it is in other countries, but they're all struggling because merino is becoming the main material, and wool is becoming essentially a waste, to the point that sheep are re-engineered, crossbred, to start losing the fleece again, because farmers do not want wool anymore because it's essentially an unwanted material in these days. I would just like to possibly to jump to images of the show. Sorry, yes, here, because we don't have so much time. Because for us, what was interesting also how we formalize the exhibition, because it is in itself a proposition also how to talk about design in exhibition space. Because we try to merge two different kind of languages, which is one of the traditional design museum, let's say, where you display products, but we presented these products together with reproductions of animals. So it's what we call it. It's almost an open diorama where we don't have any more painted backgrounds, but we have films. So the sort of the background, which is usually still, it's now in motion, and in its simplicity, because it's a rather simple idea, we thought it was wonderful to see, for instance, sheep overlapped with documents about how wool is handled within European Union, or to see sheep presented together with the tools that are used to shear them. Isn't it bizarre somehow that the history of making is always separated by the animals that equally contribute to the making as much as humans? The histories of material culture is not only histories of humans, but it's also histories of other species. This is what we are trying to somehow visually theorize with this exhibition. On a practical level, there was also a lot of knowledge within the exhibition that we are now using with our clients. And maybe this is the moment in which we can explain how we transition this sort of body of complex knowledges that are more theoretical to the conversations with our clients. And for this, allow me to momentarily use our website to talk about that. Or maybe, you know what, I don't even need to use images in this moment, but I can describe, for instance, what we are doing related to wool with a partner. I cannot mention already the company because it's not yet public, but we are working with a company that produce textiles for interior, and we started to do a research project with them on wool, where the idea they produce in many different markets and distribute globally, and we're trying to develop a project where our idea is to develop. They have three major markets: the US, Europe, and Southeast Asia. And instead of centralizing production in a place and then distribute the product globally, because that's what they do, to think of developing over an equal product in wool, which is developed in the three major markets, so in Europe, in the US, and we will find the location probably in India, but to produce the materials based on what we think it makes sense locally. So, for instance, in the US, probably we are trying to see if we can use rustic wool from local sheep instead of importing merino from Australia. So to cut CO2 emissions, but also to support sort of local farmers, since the local wool is considered generally rougher and not desirable, at least for fashion, because it is much coarser. It's not as sophisticated as merino wool, and in terms of finer material. In Europe, instead, we would like to work with upcycling existing wool, and in the production in India, we still have to understand what is best for the local market. But it is a way to take this approach and sort of reapplying it for a company, which is also requiring a different model of payment for companies, because generally for design it's different for architecture, but you are paid with royalties. But in this case, we need to be paid for this amount of investigations that we do, and it's also as if we are acting as an external R&D. Research and development for the company, where we intersect the researches they are already doing. And the first outcome that we will do, of course, it is not only product, but we generally then do a presentation where it's almost a consultancy. We propose a series of activities that we would do if we were them, by the unpacking of this relationship. And you can do this only if you invest time in research for the company itself. So what we ask the companies, for instance, is full access. So we conduct, first of all, we conducted 20 interviews to the internal team to understand how the company works. Then we ask them to share their resources, which is the producer they work with globally, and we are conducting interview with them to also listen to them. Very often, for instance, something that is emerging from this conversation is that sometimes the companies tend to impose the requirement of global certification schemes to farmers that are too small to have the possibility to pay for those certification schemes. So some of the kind of feedback we give back to the company is, well, if you really believe in ecology, then it means that you also need to interact differently with your resources. And maybe it is about forming a different kind of engagement and alliances, which is not just about asking, but it is actually about also seeing what you can give back, or which kind of support can you give them if you want to achieve this kind of commitment in terms of ecology. And the same we did also with Artec, the Finnish company for furniture. They called us after Cambio, and we operated in a very similar way. We asked for full access to what they do, and because we thought it was brilliant to work with them, because they still produce everything in Finland. And but we think they should not be focusing solely to this heritage, of the Altos, of Aino and Alvaralto, but also to really think that what they have a great chance, because there's a few companies that still produce based on a specific ecosystem. They still produce cutting birch trees from Finland, and we gave back this consultancy. And the first outcome of this consultancy is that we didn't design anything new from them, but we changed their selections of timber because from the 90s they were becoming more and more strict and not accepting any more knots or small insect trails that are actually there in the wood because of climate change, and they were discarding those elements. And we said, okay, this is not as simple as it seems. It was somehow a revolution for the company. We convinced them to broaden up the improvement also technically for the company, because that kind of wood is really not existing anymore, and accepting these apparent flaws, which are not really flaws, but they are just simply features of wood, to make it more inclusive of these features. And the outcome of this is that essentially you can use more wood of a single tree instead of needing, if you select only a part of a tree trunk because it's the most perfect to produce tools, inevitably the rest is ending up, it's not thrown away, it's used for other applications, but it's used for more temporary applications such as paper, which is, a throwaway material. So by enlarging sort of the quantities of tree they're using, we could have a much better impact in terms of in ecological terms than if we design a new product. So we made a change in their traditional production line, and they started to sell with this different selection the stool 60, which is the most famous stool of Alvarado. They're now extending on the wall line, and these are changes that are happening slowly, but we also started to convince the company that their role, as much as Alvarado was always talking, and Aino, they were talking about the role of the company in terms of propaganda of good design. We think they should do also propaganda about different ways of managing forests. And we have been so persuasive, they are thinking to acquire their own forest so they can manage the forest more responsibly, because the management of forests in Finland now is regulated or is extensively managed by companies of paper pulp. But we think their responsibility is also to change the culture, since they are such a heritage and important company for the culture of Finland. So we are trying to sort of convince the company to have a different engagement with what they do, understanding that they are a forest-based company and they should engage on that level. So I would stop here. I think I ran through a lot of content. I'm sorry if I'm being a bit overwhelming, but there was a lot of things that I wanted to share. And I guess something I can say that an approach like this, it's definitely not based on a formal approach, but rather on an investigative approach. Of course, I also want to say it's not that we do this with all our clients. These are dream scenarios. It doesn't happen with everybody. You can establish this level of in-depth conversation with your client. But what was beneficial for us is that doing presentations such as the one in those two museums clarified our approach to also our clients. So they managed to understand better what was our approach. And now when they come to us, they come with requests that are not anymore about designing a product, but actually of sort of a more in-depth engagement with what we can do with them, for them.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. So I think it would be interesting also to discuss some, let's say, questions with you. So maybe Yuri, if you could start by asking the first question.
Thank you, Simone. It looks like fantastic, interesting. It's like a future of design, and I'm worrying what could be the future of architecture in that world. Should we build buildings? Because it's honestly, we don't need more buildings. We have enough. Maybe there is a shortage of social housing. There is something, but big projects are coming. I mean, around the world, huge buildings raised. And what is the architecture for you? How you envision that as a designer and as a philosopher? Let's say as the cultural vision. Please.
Yeah. Well, this is a very good question, and you know all better than me how much there is a conversation about if we need new buildings. It's the same in design. Everybody's asking, do we need new chairs? But in architecture, it's even more so. We know there is this also commitment and interest by many architects in promoting the reuse of building, right? So for sure, there is a lot that I think the creation of new is not necessarily, it doesn't mean building from scratch. It's obvious, it's also banal, but it is still, there is a huge, there is a huge field of research and practice that can be developed by reusing what is existing. We also know, and you also probably all know that sometimes, when you start to really look into reuse of material, reuse of building, you realize there is a huge problems of stocking of materials. So there's a lot of complexities in that. I also have to say that personally, I always think that building and making should not necessarily be a guilt. you know, I can't see that as the only way forward. I think, you know, recently I was in a conversation with many people that are coming from economically disadvantaged countries. And they were saying that many of discussions related to ecology are you know, white people problems, basically. And there's many countries that still want to build, they still want to do the new, because if they are right also to do so. So I think it all boils down to, I would almost say, because I think the architect as a figure is the architect is an author. So to me, it is also an authorial perspective, the one that should be put forward. So I think what is important is to develop interesting questions and solutions for the contemporary time, and to do not just build for the sake of it. So in a way, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. The problems of architects and designers is that we are at the same time have to create the new in the sense of something that adds positively to the world, but at the same time, we also very much working based on commissions, and commissions, you know, sometimes are stupid. And so for us, the biggest challenge, because I can take it back to our problem, is that sometimes the level of compromise is a lot. So the biggest problem is that intelligent projects, they do not come only from architects, but also they come from very good commissioners. And that's the same problem that we have with design. So the only way we can do that is by somehow educating our commissioner, which is not to say we are the smart one. Huh? I don't want to position myself in a position of intellectual superiority, but it's just education, which is also self-education. These projects I presented right now, they are not meant to educate the others. In the first place, they are meant to educate myself and Andrea and the people in our office. These are projects that are of self-education that also helps to educate others, and possibly to sit down around the table with your commissioner with materials that can explain ways of thinking that can be beneficial for everybody. Things also, especially, there's many people that are interested in addressing ecology, but very often companies, they end up doing stupid projects about ecology, not because they want to do greenwashing, but simply because they're not aware enough about its complexity. So I mean, I'm not sure I replied to your question, but
thank you very much. It's very much resonates with what I feel internally. I also believe that good buildings, good products are mostly done by clients, not by us. And this is my strong belief. Thank you very much. Thank you for this answer.
You're welcome.
Yes. So, Alexei, maybe you could also proceed with some specific question to Simone.
Yes, thank you, Bogdan. Thank you, Simone, for a marvelous lecture. And I'm now in library, and I wanted to ask you about the book as a medium, because I remember all those investigations finished with book, but you gave us a link to the website, but never told anything about book. But in the side of Cambio, for example, this is definitely not just package, but also a part of exhibition. Can you please tell us how you work with books and what the meaning of it for your studio?
So I think what is interesting about a format, and the exhibition is a format, the book is a format, is that with each format you can achieve certain things. So, you know, we work a lot also with the exhibition design. And we know that in exhibition making, there's plenty of opportunity, but there's also a lot of limitations. Exhibition is a spatial experience, and it needs to be respected as such. So for instance, we would never want to do an exhibition, which is a three-dimensional book or a lecture in 3D with a lot of text, right? So you need to respect what an exhibition is, that it's a spatial experience, which means that you can address certain questions, certain subjects, certain ideas. In a book, you address others. So for instance, when we do a research work, you know, we very often we use different tools. We use books, we use the website, there is more an archive, and we use the exhibition. And sometimes we also use our own Instagram as a way of recording tracks of the investigation. The media of the book is very interesting because, first of all, you have a linear construction. Generally, you have the beginning and an end. That it already has a specific it's a specific format. What I think the way we use books in the context of our exhibition is that we very often include knowledges and things that are not there in the show, and we include a part of our research. For instance, we very often have interviews. Because of what I said before, despite it's a very common research tool, it's not particularly original, but interviews are extremely useful to allow people to make free associations. In interviews, people tend to let themselves be a bit more free, and this sometimes is extremely positive, specifically, as I said before, with scientists. Because then that knowledge is extremely complex, it becomes much more graspable. Sometimes you read the book of a philosopher, you find it very complex. You speak with a philosopher in an interview and finally you understand what he means. So this approach of the interviews is extremely digestible for the person that reads, but also for us that of course we are not experts, right? So it's in a way we really think that the work of the designer is the work of the amateur. The person that somehow don't know anything but has the ability to find out everything, and the books for us is a way of summarize with nuances these ideas, mostly through the use of images and interviews. And then of course it's also the place where we can commission texts and ask authors to elaborate on ideas, so that the book becomes a way of, it's at the same time, usually the book, it's at the same time about what happened before the exhibition, but it also already has the ambition to hint at what about the future. The future is the commissions, text to others, that they can help to broaden the spectrum of the exhibition. And the interviews are the back end, the research, essentially. And of course, then we have the website, it's more an archive. It's a bit less about analysis and it's more about dry archiving of information. But this was our favorite way of constructing things since the beginning. And I have to say, you have to think we opened the exhibition at Serpentine at the beginning of March 2020, exactly when the pandemic started. And somehow it was, everybody thought like we almost knew about the pandemic because we were already ready with plenty of different tools that the exhibition could outlive its own spatial dimension in a way. But it just comes out of the necessity of realizing that there's no one media to communicate content, but you need to use a multiplicity of media to address it. It's not also, this is not anything new. Many museum already works in the same way, right? The catalog is the normal to publish a catalog for an exhibition, but we don't publish catalogs, we publish books, which is different.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I will ask you the last question just to go back to the physical, let's say, consistency of the objects, and also our main topic of the ordinary, which I would like somehow to relate to what we've seen so far, because you made so wonderful researches, and what you're actually showing us is starting from something very ordinary as our nature, and then going into the design. But if we imagine this approach in nowadays reality of the physical objects, right? When we have the restaurant, or where we go to some physical space or a room, Yuri was saying architecture, we have a lot of objects today and we are surrounded by them. But how do you feel about the future of the design in terms of this, let's say, soul of the objects? Because sometimes this over design might lose the sense of the functional, let's say, meaning of the object, and becomes almost as an object as itself, like l'art pour l'art, something that sometimes has a meaning which, so you are doing something very interesting because you analyze the big picture and try to give some meaning. But what is interesting to understand, what is your vision for this general, let's say, contemporary design, product design, let's say, period that we are living today, because we have a lot of product design, and sometimes I would even use the word obsession, no? It becomes a sort of obsession to design. So when we speak about this ordinary, daily objects and the daily, let's say, use of the space, what is the future in your
opinion? But I really love the word ordinary. I think that I mean, I love the idea of the ordinary, but I also love the extraordinary. I don't want to be like a purist, I don't want to be. Sometimes it's also good to be. The thing with us is that I think everything is possible and everything could have a meaning if it makes sense contextually. So what I mean to say is, I love the idea of the ordinary because it has to do with something that accompanies you almost silently on a daily basis, right? But I think sometimes we also need the extraordinary. The point is that, to me, one of the biggest problems there is about actually essentially anything in contemporary culture is the idea that we need, it's very modernist idea, that we need one solution that we can apply it sort of as a grid globally on the planet. It's like when people ask you, so is wood sustainable? Should we do everything in wood? Well, the idea is it's a bit like the international style. It's about saying everything should look like the same, or we should only use wood because that's the solution, right? But if we talk about ecology, but not only ecology, but about anything really, I truly believe the only good response is when it's a regional response, which doesn't mean I don't mean regional in terms of hyper-local, but just a clear response to a specific context. What we try to do as designers very often is to respond to a context. So what I despise completely is the idea of the author as somebody that is sitting in their own room and they apply their own ideologies in a different way depending in any context. And there's plenty of architects that do that. They completely ignore context. And I don't mean only, you can read, but you can also talk about context in terms of function. You can see context as function and so on. But I think the biggest problem in terms of interior product design and so on is this idea of style in the sense of the author that sort of have an overimposed, a preconceived idea of what you should do in a context. I think that's the biggest problem. That's the same problem with ecology also, that you think, again, one solution for everything. To me, it's almost like a culture of pre-packed idea. It's like a toolbox that you apply wherever you go in any context. And I think that's so not contemporary, like our world is so like fragmented, fluctuating. Our identities are complex. So we need constant immediate responses. And that can only be crafted, if you consider context. And I think we see too little of that.
Very interesting answer, and thank you so much, because as you know, we're doing this whole month of October dedicated to the research of ordinary. So we are trying to collect, and to connect the dots between the different visions of ordinary. I then think your vision of a context is something that's very strongly binding together with what we are doing now. So I would really like to thank you for your lecture, for the answer to
You're
the
welcome.
different questions that were trying to see the different perspective, of your vision towards the product design or the politics towards design, as we were saying at the beginning. And I want to thank you also for your valuable contribution to our research, because you opened up a lot of new horizons and questions for us to investigate.
Thank you too for inviting us. We really appreciate your project, so we are super happy of your invitation. And that we could contribute to your research.
Thank you very much, Simone. It was very warm, fantastic lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Simone.
Thank you.
Keep in touch.
Bye.
You.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.